Hello and welcome. I'm Aaron Rutkoff, the executive editor of Bloomberg Green, a magazine and digital publication covering climate and the energy transition at Bloomberg. I'm so glad today to be speaking with U.S. Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. Senator Smith, you are a leader among Democrats on climate policy and energy, and right now we are seeing in Texas, for the second time in less than a year, a situation where there's a lot of deeply misleading attempts to blame renewable energy for blackouts and infrastructure problems. Last summer that happened also in California. Why do you think we're seeing people like the governor of Texas and some of your colleagues in Congress rushing to pin the blame on green energy?
Well, I think this is part of what has been a long strategy to politicize and kind of siphon the facts and the science and the data out of efforts to address climate change. You know, what's happening in Texas, first of all, is tragic. We've had a significant loss of life. We have people that are literally boiling their water because water systems are failing in big cities around the state. And the reason that this is happening has nothing to do with renewable energy in Texas. In fact, renewable energy is, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of only 10% of the energy, makes only about a 10% contribution to the energy in Texas. It has to do with the failure of fossil fuel, especially natural gas. And why has that failed? Because of a complete failure to weatherize the natural gas system for extreme weather events. And, you know, we know that we're going to be seeing more extreme weather events rather than fewer of them. So this is entirely predictable. And in fact, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission warned Texas about this 10 years ago when there was another big crisis. So the opportunity to move forward on clean energy is an opportunity that we have to seize in this moment.
You know, looking at the kind of backlash that we've seen against wind turbines in the Texas story, it struck me to look up that Minnesota itself it has a large amount of wind power happening, and the state's obviously far colder than Texas.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
exactly.
that goes to your point about weatherization and these being things we can prevent. I know you've been a part of attempts in the Senate to steer resources towards green energy standards for the country. Is it your sense that this is something where we can make progress rapidly, or given the kind of vulnerability of the infrastructure, are people going to be stuck in situations like this as climate change brings more extreme weather about?
Well, you know, you're talking about wind energy in Minnesota. Minnesota is a powerful wind energy state, and our wind energy has been functioning very well, even though Minnesota temperatures have barely broken zero over the last 10 days. And that's because we have our wind turbines weatherized. So the thing that I think we have to focus on is that we are at I think, a turning point in terms of both the policy, in terms of the technology, and also in terms of the politics when it comes to clean energy. We are seeing dramatic cost curve declines in renewable energy. We are seeing a much higher acceptance, for example, in rural parts of my state for wind energy because it augments farm incomes. And the politics of this are changing as well, especially as we, with the President Biden, focus on how moving forward on clean energy can be good for costs, can be good for jobs, can be good for our country's competitiveness, and it can be good for our health.
Well, I want to ask you about that turning point because I know in 2019 you put together legislation on national clean energy standards, and then the election happens, and we see the goal get even bigger than what you tried to do in 2019, right? So now we're looking at Biden's attempt to have 100% clean electricity grid in the United States by 2035. Can you talk to me about that change over the last 2 years and what you think is possible now in the Senate?
Yeah. Well, for really, decades, the discussion, the debate, the political debate around clean energy has been around, on the one hand, sort of saying that you can't move too quickly because you're going to have high costs, you're going to lose jobs, it's going to be countered, people are going to have to make massive sacrifices in their personal consumption patterns, versus like, we have to do this or we're all going to die. I mean, it's been a stalemated conversation. And I believe that that is changing. And in order to really push the change through with the work that President Biden and Vice President Harris are doing, and the work that we want to do in the Senate, is to focus on how we can do this in a way that expands job opportunities and expands our competitiveness. You take a senator like Joe Manchin, who is a very important senator in the Senate now because he heads the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and because he represents a state that has basically produced the coal that has made the lights go on and the power, the heating go on for people in this country for 100 years. You can't just say to Joe Manchin, oh, you all just have to change. You got to figure out a place-based strategy for how his state can be competitive and his workers can have great jobs in order to be successful.
I know there's been a big emphasis with the arrival of the Biden administration on an idea not just of jobs for people who are pushed out of old fossil fuel industries by this transition, but of a bipartisan approach to some of these issues. Do you see there being a middle ground? What does a bipartisanship on climate and clean energy legislation look like right now?
Well, look, I'm not naive about this. This is going to be complicated and it's going to be difficult. And I say this without trying to be partisan about it, that the Republican Party is actually, over the last decade or so, has moved away in many regards from being supportive of moving towards a clean energy future. But there are glimmers of opportunity, and I think we have to seize them. In the last legislative session, I was successful in working with Republican colleagues to pass some important pieces of clean energy legislation to expand battery storage and research into energy, wind energy. So yeah, I think you have to build out from that. But I think that making progress on a clean electricity standard, for example, making progress on improving our electric grid so that it has the resilience and the reliability that we need with renewables as well as with what's happening in Texas. That's going to be hard work, and the coalition isn't built yet, but we're in the progress of building it right now.
I don't want to go too deep in the weeds of the mechanics of getting stuff passed, but if it proves to be the case that there aren't 60 votes there, do you feel like it's necessary in order to address climate to go around or do away with the filibuster if that's what's standing in the way of a very meaningful climate legislation?
One of the things that we're working on right now is how this process that's called the reconciliation process could also be used as a way of moving clean energy forward. As we think about a large infrastructure and clean energy package, which I expect we'll start working on in the Senate later in March, reconciliation, that process, which only requires a majority vote in the Senate, is an important option for us.
And now, if we're thinking ahead to 4 years from now, how do you judge success? I mean, I know the mantra from the president and the vice president is that climate is jobs. So are you measuring success based on creating jobs around clean energy? Is it something where you're looking at particular climate metrics to see whether we're on a path towards progress? How do you judge basically if we're moving in the right direction?
Well, the metric for progress is how we are doing at decarbonizing our economy. And I say that we should start with decarbonizing the electric system, which is a big contributor to carbon pollution in our atmosphere. So to me, that's the core metric. How are we doing at getting carbon out of our power system? And we have to do that in a way that is creating jobs and creating opportunities, especially in the places that have been hardest hit by the transition. And I would say especially in the communities that have felt the greatest harm from air pollution from fossil fuels.
Well, I think after what we've seen in Texas in the past week, probably a lot more people now are thinking about the grid than were before. Thank you so much for being with us today and walking us through all this.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.